Hi, my name is Sarah, and I'm a watercolor artist and an aspiring surface pattern designer, and today I'm going to answer the question, what is surface pattern design? Simply put, surface pattern design is the art and the process of creating pattern designs that go on surfaces. And a surface pattern designer is, well, it's somebody who creates those designs. Typically, the surfaces in question are on physical products being sold out in the world, but surface pattern design can certainly also involve the creation of digital assets. Now, I realize it's kind of a cop-out to use the words surface, pattern, and design in the definition, so to help me explain what I mean, let's go on a quick field trip. Believe it or not, surface pattern design is everywhere, and once you put your design goggles on, I promise you are going to start noticing designs all over the place. I kind of compare this to when I first learned to identify trees. Before I took a woody plants class, I didn't even realize that I never really noticed the trees around me. But once I knew how to identify the trees in my area, my whole world opened up and I started to see trees I recognized virtually everywhere I looked. My experience has been similar with surface pattern design. As soon as I became aware of the fact that there are people out in the world creating designs for products, I started noticing patterns all over the place. Don't get me wrong, I've always been drawn to a beautiful wrapping paper and a lovely floral notebook, but I never used to stop to appreciate the fact that there's a whole industry dedicated to the creation of these patterns. And I certainly never used to think about how real people out in the world create these designs for a living. So while you really could see pattern designs on basically any surface you can imagine, here are a few places you're likely to see them all the time. Things like wrapping paper, stationery, clothing, curtains, bedding, other paper goods like party supplies, for example, wallpaper, of course, and then things you might not think about like electronic accessories like phone cases or something like that. And this is so far from exhaustive, really the list goes on and on. Now, you might hear people refer to both surface design and surface pattern design as two separate things. So I want to take a minute to use a couple of the products I picked up on my little excursion to explain the difference between these concepts. Surface design is a broader description for basically any type of design that goes on surfaces, typically for products. Surface designs do not necessarily have to repeat. So take this paper sheet I picked up from Paper Source, designed by Rifle Paper Co., for example. This is certainly a surface design because it's a lovely floral design that's applied to a surface of a product. In this case, that's decorative paper, but the design itself does not repeat. So this would not be classified as a repeating pattern. Let me take this over to Photoshop and I'll show you what I mean. When you align this side by side, you can see it doesn't continue seamlessly. And the same is true if we try and do it from top to bottom. Now, surface pattern design falls under the general umbrella of surface design, but typically surface pattern design refers to the use of repeating patterns on product surfaces. So I'll demonstrate this using the gift wrap that I also picked up at Paper Source. Unlike the rifle paper example, this pattern does seamlessly repeat. So this one's interesting because you can see that there's a repeat in each row of these houseplants that we have here. But we can also zoom out and identify this big repeating tile where the repeat will continue on and on and on. So repeating patterns are used in all kinds of products like fabric, curtains, wallpaper, and so much more. And like I said, once you put your pattern goggles on, you'll find yourself looking for the repeat in every design you see. So at this point, you might be asking yourself, what makes a pattern count as a repeating pattern? So I kind of hinted at this earlier, but basically a repeating pattern is one that can continue indefinitely without creating any seams or awkward cuts. The smallest unit of a repeating pattern is typically referred to as a repeating tile, where everything on the left-hand side matches up perfectly with everything on the right-hand side, and the same is true for the top and bottom sides. This way, when you put multiple tiles next to each other, the pattern can continue forever. There are actually a ton of different types of repeating patterns, but I'll save that discussion for another video. So how do you actually make repeating patterns? Well, there are so many ways you can do this, but they mostly fit into 3 categories. Firstly, there's vector software, things like Adobe Illustrator or Fresco. You can also use raster software, so that would be tools like Photoshop or Procreate. And finally, you can also create repeating patterns by hand in the real world without any software needed. I would say that the majority of surface pattern designers rely on vector-based tools to create their repeating patterns. Vectors typically create very clean graphic shapes, and one of their big benefits is that they can be infinitely scaled without becoming pixelated. Now, there are many people who think you can only create repeating patterns using vector software, and that's just not true. You can certainly create seamless repeats using programs like Photoshop and Procreate. In fact, that's what I have done for 99% of my patterns. I actually create my patterns from watercolor paintings, which I then arrange into a repeat in Photoshop. Now, believe it or not, you can actually also create repeating patterns by hand. Before all this fancy design software existed, this is basically how all patterns were made. You can see that I painted these betta fish so that they can repeat perfectly, both from left to right and from top to bottom. So I hope you now have a better idea of what surface pattern design is, and now that you've put your surface pattern design goggles on, I bet you'll start noticing designs all throughout your everyday life. If you're curious to learn how I create my repeating patterns in Photoshop, I have a full tutorial series that's basically a mini course that walks you through my process. You can click here to watch the very first video in that series. So thanks so much for watching this video, and I will see you very soon for the next one. Bye everyone.